Guys, hey going, this is Tom. I am just going to do a little video about insulin and why it makes us fat. I'll try not to bore you with too much technical jibber jabber, but just going to give you a little bit of insight as to why we need to control insulin, and yeah, and that's about it really. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so insulin. First of all, what is insulin? Okay, insulin is a hormone. Hormones are basically tell the body what to do the whole time. Okay, insulin is the most powerful hormone in the body, and it will overcome all other hormones regardless of what it's doing. Okay, so glucose equals an insulin response. Basically, glucose, sugar. Think of glucose as sugar. Starchy carbohydrates, bread, pasta, rice, sugar, soft drinks, carbohydrate powder, the fruit, anything sugary, glucose, okay? And that equates to an insulin response. Now, insulin tells the cells to store glucose and to burn glucose as fuel. Muscle cells store it as glycogen. Okay, glycogen is just a breakdown. Glycogen is what we want to pump into our muscles to make them bigger and stronger. Now, the liver stores it as glycogen and it stores it as fat. I'm not going to talk about fructose and the responses in the body in this video. That's for another time. Fat cells store glucose as fat. Now, as the insulin response decreases, fat cells release fat from the meal to be burnt as energy. So a good tip here, guys, is try not to eat carbohydrates and fats together at the same time. Now, just to stop myself in my tracks, this video is more for people that are out of shape already, okay, and for people that are trying to get into shape. People who are already in shape probably don't have a bad diet, probably are exercising and, or I should say, training, and yeah, don't need to worry too much, but understanding a bit of the science behind it is always good. Okay, so getting back to my point, not a great idea to eat high carb and fats together in one meal. Okay, the reason being is because, like it said here, okay, insulin is the most it's the strongest hormone in the body, and it will outdo any others. All right, so basically, if you have a high carb food with fats, the fats will get stored straight away, digested first and stored straight away. And because the sugar in that food, in the high carbohydrate meal, elevates your insulin, insulin will tell your body to burn the glucose first. Okay, so the balance is actually created when the calories stored during the meal are released back and burnt as fuel in the hours after the meal. So that's the ideal world. That's what we would like to get to. Okay, so we'll go up here. So, like I said before, insulin, most powerful hormone, okay? All hormones promote us to get lean. Hormones really struggle to promote fat burning or fat secretion out of the cells if insulin is too high, okay? So, as soon as you start thinking about food, okay, you start secreting insulin, okay? So, moral of the story and the moral of this whole video is to regulate your blood sugar levels and to regulate your insulin response, okay? Cortisol is an interesting hormone. So cortisol is a fat-burning hormone, okay? However, it can make us fat even when insulin is elevated, okay? Or not elevated, okay? So too much cortisol in the system and a chronic release of cortisol, so stressed out job, lack of sleep, too much caffeine, shit food, all those are stress responses in the body. It's not just, oh my God, I've got shitloads of work to do, I feel stressed. It's everything. It's just, the 21st century, the sort of the Western way of life, we all lead pretty stressed out lives. Now, take myself, for example, I've got a pretty good diet. I'm a personal trainer. I should have a good diet. and I do have a good diet, and I train extremely hard for my Olympic weightlifting. I put my body under a considerable amount of stress inside the gym and outside the gym. I try and get 7 to 8 hours worth of sleep, and I still hold a little bit of body fat, okay? More to do with the point that there are some excess calories there because I'm trying to, get bigger for training and for strength purposes, but also because, I'm stressed. I run a business. There's a lot going on. Life sort of stresses me out quite heavily at the best of times. So cortisol is a fat burning hormone, but it can promote fat storage as well. Okay, so we got a couple of hormones that we're going to talk about. Hormone sensitive lipase and lipoprotein lipase. Super sensitive to insulin, and having high levels of LPL actually promotes fat storage. Okay, so what we want to try and do is we want to stress the body out in the right sort of way, and not have too much of a blood sugar response, and then that little lovely little hormone cortisol can actually make us leaner. Okay, so let's just have a look at the chain of events. All right, so we think about foods. Probably carbohydrates. Again, I'm talking to people that are untrained and unfit and have a shit diet. And by shit diet, I don't mean that you eat salad. I would consider just eating salad all the time. I wouldn't actually consider that a good diet. That's probably not the best diet. You're probably lacking a lot of stuff. So I'm talking about a balanced diet, okay? So start thinking about foods, you start secreting insulin. Insulin tells fat cells to shut down the release of fatty acids by inhibiting hormone-sensitive lipase. So hormone-sensitive lipase is the thing that we want to stimulate to release fatty acids into the system to burn off as energy. However, if insulin levels are high, then you will inhibit hormone-sensitive lipase, meaning that the fatty acids are not being produced and not being released, and insulin actually stimulates LPL, which will basically get us to store fat, make us fatter. Okay, so we get hungry, we eat, we secrete more insulin, carbs are eaten, blood sugar elevates, we secrete more insulin, the fat from the food gets stored as triglycerides, with carbs converted by liver into fat. Fat cells get bigger due to these triglycerides, okay? So basically you get fatter, okay? Fat stays in the cells until insulin drops, so there is no circulation of fat, and then this will make you fatter. Now the cycle goes that, what goes up must come down. So if you're jacking your blood sugar levels up at the first thing in the morning by eating things like cereal, toast, croissant, bagels, having sugary coffee and sugary tea, milk, shit like that, well, guess what? Your insulin levels are going to get jacked up. Your fat burning capabilities are pretty much put on hold. And then what goes up has to come down. Comes down, you start getting hungry again. Okay, so it's not even as if the body has any chance to get the fat out the cells to start burning, because by the time you're hungry again, you're going to start craving carbohydrates again, and you can start eating again. The whole cycle repeats. So pretty much you just get fatter. So high periods of high insulin means the fat burning time is reduced, right? That's what I just said. Okay, so if fat is not used, it's put back into the cells. So yes, it might be getting mobilized 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It just does not stop. But it doesn't mean that your body is actually going to utilize it as an energy source, okay? And this, the release of fatty acids from the cells for just general circulation is always happening. But what insulin does is it stops them being released and as fuel, okay? Or getting burnt as fuel. It just cycles it around your system, gets put back in, okay? So most of our energy is stored as fat, okay? This is why we store fat, because it's the body's preferred source. Not carbohydrates is not the preferred source, okay? Fats are the preferred source, which is why we store fat, and why everything is, broken down and turned into fat. even proteins, even amino acids by gluconeogenesis which is a fancy term which I like saying. Every process the body does promotes the body to turn something back into fat. Okay, so carbs can't be the preferred source of energy because shit gets broken down and transferred into fat. So why does it do that if it's not, if it wasn't the preferred source, then why would it all the systems be in place for things to be turned into fat and get stored as fat and used for a later date? Okay, so carbs are burnt first. Okay, that's why diabetes is around, because there are issues as far as blood sugar too high, too low, all the rest of it. So the body will always try and deal with blood sugar first. Okay, so if we look at a carb fat based meal like a burger or something similar, the fats are digested first and stored. The carbs are burnt due to the rise in glucose blood sugar levels. It's got to deal with it. Okay, and again, we're going back. Carbohydrates are consumed, insulin is secreted. You secrete insulin even when thinking about food. Okay, so insulin, we've gone through that little piece there. Okay, so let's just have a look at it. So insulin tells the cells to store glucose and burn glucose for fuel. Muscle cells store it as glycogen, liver stores as glycogen and as fat. I have gone through this. Sorry, I'm repeating myself. Okay, so controlling insulin. All right, so the way that you can control it is by limiting your starchy carbohydrate intake. My best advice if you're trying to get leaner, okay, is, and also it'll help your strength gains as well. You don't have to eat carbs at each meal. It just depends like the type of training that you're doing. And most people, unless you're training sort of like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, maybe even 3 hours a day for whatever your sport is, if you're just sort of 60 minutes in the gym doing some deadlifts, doing some squat, doing some press, doing some pulls, all that sort of stuff, doing some sprints, you don't really need a lot of carbohydrates during the day. You just base them around your training time. So it's more measured, and insulin response is more measured when you eat just protein and fat. Okay, best thing to do in the mornings, what I'm saying there, most sensitive in the mornings as well. So be aware of what you eat first thing. So again, going back, if you're eating like croissant and toast and cereal and God knows what else, those sort of things, you need to fix it up and you need to stop eating that crap because that's not going to help you get leaner. Okay, it's just going to destabilize your blood sugar levels. Your insulin responses are going to be all over the place. Your pancreas is going to end up shot, and it can lead to big problems. So like what I've said here, works simultaneously to get so insulin works simultaneously to make sure muscles get proteins to rebuild. Okay, so it's a non-discriminatory hormone, right? It'll shuttle nutrients into whatever cells needs it or whatever cells are open to it. All right, so that's why post-workout protein and carbs are a great idea, because carbs will elevate your insulin levels. You're putting protein into your system as well. Your muscles, after you've been using them, little things come to the surface. They're called GLUT3 receptors or GLUT3 receptors. They come to the surface and they start pulling out the sugars and the proteins out of your bloodstream and pulling them into the muscles. Okay, and that's what you want. That's what you want, to make them as sensitive as possible, and exercise, training with weights, not just going for a run. Okay, people always think that, I need to lose weight, I need to go for a run. Okay, I get it, you're trying to burn off energy, but look, the best thing that you can do is start lifting some weights, okay, because that's going to make shit a lot more sensitive to nutrients, all right? So insulin is a principal regulator for fat metabolism, with two main enzymes working, HSL and LPL. Okay, I've said it a couple of times, and we're going to go into that. So enzyme LPL, lipoprotein lipase, directs the nutrients where to go. Okay, so this is on a bit of a deeper level, a bit sciencey, but basically LPL breaks down triglycerides into fatty acids and helps the flow into cells for energy. Okay, so insulin stimulates this hormone or this enzyme to start throwing things into the cells. Okay, and it breaks down triglycerides into fatty acids to be burnt. Okay, and triglycerides are things that when they go into fat cells, you get bigger. So the more insulin is secreted, the less activity on muscle cells and more on fat cells. Okay, so all cells, have got these, and when insulin is high, it is actually going to tell the fat cells to draw in nutrients, to draw in fat, pretty much, because remember, the body's having to deal with the glucose. It's burning glucose, and it's probably actually going to burn it and transfer it into fat. And the LPL is actually is stimulated, and it's telling the cells to pull in the fats, and yeah, so it's actually going to make you fatter. So now, when you train, on the other hand, LPL is decreased on fat cells, and it's increased on muscle cells. So hopefully that makes sense to you, that if you train, LPL is increased. So LPL is an enzyme that draws things into the cells, and if insulin is high all the time, then that's why the cells are going to get filled with fat, because you're stimulating LPL. Okay, so LPL is more active in men around the abdominal area. Great news, guys. Not really. So if you're sedentary, you don't do any exercise, and you've got a bad diet, and you're jacking your insulin levels up, you're telling LPL that's more active in your guts to store fat, right? Fat equates to low testosterone. Low testosterone equates to fat. You see, it's a nasty little circle. So high testosterone levels decrease LPL activity. Get your T levels up. That's what I'm getting from that. LPL is more active in women around the bums and hips. Great. So that's why you're storing fat around that area, and especially if you're sedentary, okay? Because nothing is decreasing the sensitivity of that enzyme. Okay, so if insulin is high, then fatty acids will not be taken up by muscle cells, but by fat cells, okay? So pretty much LPL is dangerous when stimulated by insulin. Again, take-home story, keep your insulin levels low, apart from around when you train. HSL, hormone-sensitive lipase, this is also influenced by insulin, but HSL works inside of fat cells to break down triglycerides, turns them into fatty acids, and used as fuel. Okay, so that's the one that we want. HSL is what we're looking for as well. Okay, so this is influenced by insulin. It works inside of the cells instead of outside of the cells to break down triglycerides and break down fat inside the cells, basically making you leaner. Okay, so all this is helped, okay, your insulin sensitivity on your muscle cells and your fat cells with HSL and LPL is helped when you sleep. Okay, so sleep is the best fat burner when you control your insulin levels. All right, and a lot of people who are very overweight, who have high fat content in their body, you might find that you don't sleep that well. So you need to start exercising, stop looking at your phones before you go to sleep, all that sort of stuff to help you get to sleep more. Now, if insulin is in abundance, obviously fat is stored, it increases the amount of glucose pumped into fat cells, same with muscle cells, increase of glucose metabolized, increased glycerol molecules, which is a byproduct of glucose metabolism. Glycerol binds with fatty acids to produce triglycerides. We get fat because triglycerides are the things that make fat cells bigger. Insulin increases fat cell production. So insulin actually, you're kind of actually born with a certain amount of fat cells, and once you can, all this basically is making fat, so triglycerides go into the fat cells and increase the size of those fat cells. But when you actually start producing more fat cells, which makes more room for storage, then say hello to obesity and morbid obesity, because that's what happens. And that is a really bad situation when your body actually starts producing more fat cells. Like normally we can just sort of blow out a bit and then shrink, and blow out a bit and then shrink, and that's just your fat cells sort of increasing through the number of triglycerides in there. But when your body starts producing more fat cells to accommodate more fat storage, that's when we have a problem. That's when we get fat. So I've gone through a little bit here. Hopefully some of this information has helped us understand that the most important thing as far as hormone responses is to try and control your insulin levels. Now, insulin's not the devil, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't eat carbohydrates. Okay, I'm not a strong believer of the paleo diet or this diet or that diet or anything. I don't think there should be any diet. It should be just eating normally. But there are some little tricks that you can use to increase your results. And it would be I would say, the take home from this is get better sleep, because that will help you get leaner, because you get lean in your sleep. Stabilize your blood sugar levels first thing in the morning. So don't start having sugar in your coffee, sugar in your tea, milk, because milk's a sugar, lactose is a sugar, right? So cut that shit out of your diet. Have some eggs or some nuts and some meat, some fats, coconut oil, omega-3 oil, flaxseed oil, something like that, that's going to control your hunger. It's going to stabilize your blood sugar, and it's going to stabilize your insulin. Okay? And just be aware of, little bits and pieces that will increase your insulin levels, and to be aware that once your insulin levels are up, and if you've got a high level of fat anyway, then you're going to be storing more fat. Okay? So that's a little presentation on why insulin makes us fat. Hopefully I didn't confuse too many people. But the take-home message is control your insulin to control your fat. Okay, thanks guys.